right, welcome everybody. So glad you're here. Let me get my screen shared so we can, only the 1000th time we've done Zoom and now it's like, take a second. Okay, well, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
We're here.
Yes.
We made it. We made it. The end of the Safe+Sound.
It's been an eventful week.
It really has.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it.
It's been great.
I don't know if we have any repeat offenders here who joined us for our previous 2 webinars. So we did one on respirator fit testing on Wednesday, and then we did one yesterday on noise monitoring. I think those will be available on our YouTube channel. Is that correct?
They will be. Yep. I'll be sending out an email hopefully by the end of the day. And I know we'll get questions. I'll go ahead and say it. We will give y'all access to these PowerPoint slides that Dr. Lynch is about to go over, and then you'll have access to all 3 of the live recordings actually, hopefully by the end of the day. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
Absolutely.
So that's clearly Justin. He's our marketing manager.
Everybody.
I'm Stephanie Lynch. I'm our senior technology and research manager. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, especially on a Friday. Justin's going to be monitoring the chat, and he'll drop in whatever is needed, interrupt me as necessary.
Yep. Feel free to drop your questions and comments in that chat field, and then we'll get to as many of them as we can. So
yeah, questions, comments, really nice seeing everybody where they're from. That's fun. We're in Birmingham, Alabama. And it's actually not boiling hot today. So
it's
that's
not bad.
Speaking of heat stress, we're actually in a good place today. Okay. So let me start off with
Stephanie, who are we?
We are OHD.
We are OHD.
We are OHD. We are OHD. We manufacture and sell industrial hygiene and safety products and equipment. And we're just passionate about educating people and then also passionately protecting the world's workforce.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
We really like it. Gives us a lot of sort of pleasure in our jobs. It's very a lot of job satisfaction.
It does.
Okay.
And what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about heat stress.
Okay, let's do it.
Guys, I have not had enough coffee. I apologize for that. Okay, so let's start off with some foundational information about heat stress. I think we're all hearing a lot more about heat stress recently. And that's just because, well, no matter the reason, it is in fact getting hotter, right? And then because of this national emphasis program that OSHA put in place earlier this year. But heat stress is the overall burden and load in the form of physiological stress that is put on our bodies when we're exposed to heat. Several factors play into this load. Heat illnesses are what result from heat stress. So people also have their different levels of sensitivity to that load. And a lot of different things impact that, and we'll cover those a little bit more closely. So I just mentioned heat illnesses result from heat stress. They have a very wide range of symptoms and severity. And then despite what this graphic might look like it's implying, they don't actually have to progress. You don't start with heat rash and then necessarily move on to cramps. You can actually go straight to heat stroke. So people I mentioned have very different levels of sensitivity. So this is just to show the illnesses visually based on their severity. So you don't have to have a heat rash before you go into heat cramps. Heat rash is also known as prickly heat, or at least that's what we call it down here. And it often occurs in hot, humid environments, and it's where sweat does not easily get evaporated off of your skin. So your sweat ducts get clogged, and then you get a rash. Any of y'all had prickly heat? No, I have.
I have.
Yeah. And then once you've had it, you're more, well, this goes for any of the heat illnesses. Once you've had any heat illness, you're moving forward more susceptible to further heat illnesses.
Oh, really?
So yeah, you're going to get your heat rash. So the next time you are overexposed, that heat rash might come on more quickly. And then it's going to take a little bit longer to resolve. Okay. So it always seems to come on quite suddenly, and then it's going to take quite a while to go away. Heat cramps may occur alone, or they can be something that you experience when you're having one of the more serious heat illnesses. Those are those painful muscle spasms you get. They're caused by sweating when you're doing really hard physical activity in a hot environment. And the cramps can be caused by either too much or too little salt. And it's usually your very tired muscles that are susceptible. And so for me personally, when I experience heat cramps, it's actually usually like that night. So I'll have done some real serious physical exertion during the day. Well, real serious for me. I mean, some real intense gardening and beer consumption, which we'll get into how that impacts your heat susceptibility. But so you're going to get that painful cramp. I get those in my legs, usually either that evening once I've posted up on the couch or once I'm laying down in bed. So get those heat cramps. We all kind of get them differently, right? So once you then go into heat exhaustion, that's when you excessively sweat, and that's caused you to lose too much fluid or too much salt. And you're still going to sweat, but you may get a headache, get very dizzy, you'll feel very weak, you'll have some mood changes, you might get confused or become very irritable. You can get nauseated, feel sick to your stomach. One telltale sign is the very pale, clammy skin. And then that differs from the most serious heat illness, which is heat stroke, because heat stroke, you're actually going to stop sweating and you're going to get very red hot skin and your temperature is going to ramp up quickly. Now, sometimes with heat stroke, it doesn't kill immediately. And like I mentioned, it also makes you more susceptible to a future heat stroke. I actually just heard yesterday for the first time that Bruce Lee may have died from a heat stroke. So Bruce Lee had his sweat glands in his armpits removed because he didn't think that sweating looked good on TV, which he may or may not be right about that, but it made the heat burden worse on him. And he had a heat illness, maybe I think they said 10 days before. And so they think that heat stroke may have played into what killed him. But so even if it doesn't kill you in that moment, so that first episode that he had, what it can do is shut down major body organs. It can cause acute heart, liver, kidney, and muscle damage, central nervous system problems, and blood disorders. So you can see very serious. And so even if you do survive, you can actually end up having sort of lifelong problems that are the result of that heat stroke. Okay, so I mentioned very briefly the risk factors, but I'm not sure how well you can see this. Hopefully you can kind of see some of those terms in there, but these are the environmental and individual risk factors for heat stress. And this can be found at NIOSH. This is a graphic straight from NIOSH. Oh, that's another thing I forgot to do. Really want to thank everybody who's part of Safe+Sound Week as a sponsor, or one of the foundational bodies. So OSHA, NIOSH, ASSP, NSC, AHA, all those organizations who really help put this together. And I'm looking forward to NSC in San Diego, where it should be a nice temperature. Okay, so anyway, back into it. These risk factors. Some risk factors are, of course, the just environmental conditions, right? So what is the actual air temperature? What is the relative humidity in the air? Those are pretty easy to identify, but others are related to your work. So how strenuous is your work? What gear do you have to wear? And then still others, and actually most, are personal factors. So that's going to be things like your age, your fitness level, your medications. I very briefly touched on alcohol use, caffeine consumption. As far as those individual factors, you might be able to just thinking about it, that those could be possibly very difficult to account for, right? If you don't have a really good relationship with your employees and maybe just know them on a pretty personal level, you might not know about some of these things. So you want to make sure that you've created a culture of trust, and that when you educate your team about heat-related illnesses, that they're going to be able to identify these risk factors in themselves and do whatever's necessary to account for that, whether it's on the level, the personal level that they need to, or whether that's coming to their supervisor and saying, hey, I'm more susceptible to these. I just started a new medication. I need to be a little bit more careful. So those are some things that might be a little bit difficult, but that all comes with creating your culture, which is very difficult. I'm not trying to minimize that, but you have to have that culture in place before you can expect these people to maybe be forthcoming about some of the things that are going on with them. And then you have to train them appropriately for them to even know that they need to come to you about these things, right? Okay, so we care, right? All of us care, and we're here participating in Safe+Sound Week because we want our employees to go home safe, in the same, if not better condition than when they came in. Even if you are going home every day straight worn out, that's not good. that means that your body is not getting enough time to recover. And, you know, your home life is valuable, and a good home work-life balance makes you a better employee. But some of these statistics are just very startling. So they're worth mentioning. So every day, 11 workers are either seriously injured or die from heat stress. The 3-year average of work-related deaths caused by heat has doubled since the 1990s. And then I think I've mentioned this, but you know, it's just getting hotter. So 18 of the last 19 years were the hottest on record. So, you know, not trying to get political here, just for whatever the reason, it's getting hotter. The 3-year, I mentioned that, but it's very likely that those deaths, whether they're work-related or not, from heat stress are very underreported, because this is kind of twofold, right? You think about a person who's experiencing a heat illness. If they become disoriented or confused, that could lead to them having an accident that ultimately becomes fatal. Well, if that's what happens, they might not connect that back to that heat illness. One of the things that is very striking to me is I worked at a steel mill over a summer as a co-op here in Alabama, and it's very hot here. And we had a guy who was killed walking through a run where we had steel pipes roll down the run. And we couldn't figure out why he would have gone through that run, you know, and when we had all these root cause analyses and this, you know, investigation, and of course OSHA came on site, all of this stuff, I don't recall one person mentioning that it could have been heat. You know, if that poor guy got overheated and he maybe became confused, he could have wandered into that run, as opposed to, I think what we ultimately decided was that, you know, he was just trying to take a shortcut or, you know, something like that. So I think that there's a high likelihood that a lot of these accidents that we think are maybe related to being clumsy or whatever might not be recognized as being actually connected to becoming overcome by heat. Another very startling one is that heat is the leading cause of death among all weather-related phenomena. So that's your tornadoes, your hurricanes, your floods, and that's crazy to me. So
Staggering.
Yeah, it's staggering. And so this is a very important issue. So clearly, that's why we care about it. Okay. Clearly, we know that it can cause harm to the person who experiences it when we talk about a heat illness. But it can also impact an entire work group. So like what would it do to you or your crew if you had a teammate collapse? So you think about it, and yes, that person is out and there are impacts that are felt as far as you need to train a new employee possibly, or because it's going to depend on how long they might be out. And the recovery time for something like heat exhaustion is quite long, several days, if not weeks. Heat stroke is even, you know, worse, more severe, but also just, it's not, you know, I don't want to get too sappy here, but the emotional toll that can happen when you've had a teammate collapse next to you. There's a lot that can go on with that. So I also mentioned, I think a lot of accidents may have heat as that underlying cause, and that's because, you know, you may become confused, tired, dizzy, or irritable. But something I may not have mentioned is that it can also cause your glasses to fog up or your hands to become sweaty within your gloves. You know, those are other things that may lead to an increase in accidents. Okay, but so of course, another reason that we care about heat stress is because we are regulated to do so. And we're always regulated to do so based on the general duty clause. So employers must provide their employees with a workplace that is free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And heat stress, heat illness falls into that category. We do know that heat is dangerous, and we do know that it can cause serious physical harm. So this is how heat injury and illness can be cited and could always be cited, even before the National Emphasis Program. But so now there's a National Emphasis Program, and that was pretty recently released. So yeah, effective since April of this year. So OSHA placed this national emphasis on heat-related illness, and it applies to all industries, but it does target those that are considered at risk. How about all of y'all? Is anyone, can they drop in the chat? Do you know if your industry is on there? And so if so, what is your industry? The list is quite exhaustive. My most recent visit was to it was a linen company. So they wash and dry linens, and they were actually on that list. And so they were in southern Georgia, and I mean, it is very hot there, but the drying of the linens, the washing of the linens, those contribute to the heat and humidity. And I really hadn't considered it. Of course, I should have. But when you're doing that on a commercial level, it impacts the environment, right?
Yeah. So we have construction, we have
Nice.
food processing
Yeah.
as well. So
Very good, very good. So OSHA is doubling their heat-related inspections, and they are targeting that list. So those are the industries that are considered high risk for heat. But just for the record, again, this national emphasis program applies to all industries. If OSHA comes to your site for any reason, they will be asking you about your heat illness prevention plan. They will also be targeting what they're calling heat priority days. And that, by their definition, are those days where it's at or above 80 degrees Fahrenheit and at or above 40% humidity. So, practically every day from spring to fall here in Birmingham. But so wherever you are, know when you're in a heat priority day. Another really important aspect when we're talking about heat stress is this idea of being acclimatized. So when you're acclimated to the heat, you are going to experience more efficient sweating, more efficient core temperature stabilization, more efficient blood flow to your skin. And that's because that blood is supposed to be cooling, almost like a radiator. And then you're going to have better heart rate recovery. So once you've acclimated to the environment that you're working in, you're going to have all these benefits and you're going to hold up better. You're going to be more resistant to that heat burden, to heat stress. This chart is going to help you distinguish the symptoms of various heat illnesses. So of course you need to be able to look for these, essentially in yourself, but also in each other. Because you can become disoriented and confused with heat illness, it's vital that you're kind of watching out for everyone else and have a kind of plan in place for what that is. Another big thing is if you have any, lone workers, then you want to be sure, if you know that they're in a hot, humid environment, that they're at risk for, heat stress. The number one, you're sending them out with appropriate stuff that they know that, whatever it is, maybe that their truck is set up to be their cooling area. They have cool water, they've got a cooler, all the stuff that they need, but also just check in on them every now and then. And if you get, a radio call that feels a little bit off, that you have a plan set in place for how to help that employee. Sorry, I got off on a little soapbox there for a minute, but so to acclimate ourselves and our employees, we're going to need to ease into our work. So OSHA recommends a 20% increase in work intensity per day. So that would be 1 week when you were first starting a job. But this is just one guide. And I honestly think, and this is just, Stephanie Lynch's opinion, but this is assuming that you've already been in the hot environment. So you live in Birmingham, Alabama, but you're going to work, in construction in Birmingham, Alabama. So you're somewhat acclimated to the normal heat, but it's just the labor that you're adjusting to, right? So remember that people, people are very different and jobs are very different. But so new employees count for the vast majority of heat illnesses. So you need to have the plan in place specifically and especially for them. One big thing is new employees can come on and they want to be able to keep up with all these veteran workers. So they get on there like, I know that I can do the same amount of work and they're trying to do it and they can't keep up. And it's not a reflection of them and their abilities, it's that they need to ease into their work, and it's actually dangerous if they don't. Another thing that I've been more concerned about as I've aged and as my workforce has aged is some of the guys who maybe have been working at the plant for 15, 20 years, and they still think that they can do what they did 15, 20 years ago. And that's just not necessarily true. And we all need to adjust to our own capabilities and limitations. And that's sort of something that, we need to train people on to get the best out of them and ensure that, they aren't going home every day, dog tired, and then not even having the time to be better. So then they're starting the next day at a deficit a little bit. And it's just, that's how that heat burden can kind of accumulate to where you end up having a really serious illness. And you think it came on just that day, but really it's been accumulating kind of for a long time. Okay. So this is what I think is more appropriate if you're dropped into a totally new environment. So you move from Ohio to Alabama and you're starting a new construction job or job at the steel mill, right? So it can take up to 14 days in that way for you to acclimate. You're going to gradually increase your exposure, and you're going to ease into your work intensity to the extent possible. You also want to try to avoid the hottest parts of the day, and then schedule your heaviest work for the cooler parts. This is something that you should actually do no matter what. Like, you should do this whenever possible, even once you are acclimated. I am seeing this a bit more often. Do any of y'all alter your schedules in the summer months and move it to where maybe you're working a little bit earlier, or maybe you do a little bit more work in the evening? If we have some guys in construction, I wonder if they're not doing that. My dad's a general contractor, and I know that they alter some of their work. They used to do it a lot more when they had to do new builds outside, but now he strictly does commercial renovations. Neither here nor there. Okay. Anybody respond to that one?
Yeah, we have a few people that say absolutely, and they do all that strenuous work earlier in the day before it gets hotter. So,
yes.
Yep.
And if you have anything that's, lower level stress, essentially, that's not a good word when we're talking about heat stress, but like less physical, less strenuous, you can do that in those afternoon hours. That's a good point. Okay. The heat index is what you're hearing your local meteorologist referencing when they're talking about what it feels like. It's taking into account the day's predicted high temperature and then the predicted relative humidity. So I think we all know down here how much of a difference the humidity makes and how it feels outside. But if you don't in your area, then you really want to pay attention to it, because we're going to be a little bit more naturally acclimated to our humidity here. But so if it gets really humid in your area and your guys aren't used to it, that's something that's going to be a big red flag for how they're not going to be able to do the same level of work that they were able to do on those drier days. It is important here to notice these limitations. So if you look down here, these are only, or at least they were developed only for shady light wind conditions. So once you get exposure to the full sun, you can just go ahead and add 15 degrees to any of these temperatures that you see up here. And you see that is a huge difference. It also points out the difference about strong winds. And then if you have dry air, that can end up, if it's just drying you out constantly and you're not able to keep up a good sweat. It's so weird. You have to have this kind of perfect balance. You need to be able to sweat, but if you're getting hot air just blown across you and you're not able to keep sort of sweat, you're just going to get really hot really fast. And then if you can't evaporate your sweat at all, so if it's too humid outside, then you're going to also overload. So it's either way. This is a really helpful tool. I don't know exactly how long it's been out there, but this is OSHA and NIOSH, I believe, their heat index app. I don't know if I have my phone on me. I don't, but I have this app, and it has a precautions button, so you can go see about kind of what the conditions are near you. There's also a Spanish version for those of our customers, so that's helpful. It has a precautions button, and you can click to get some tips for handling the heat in your area. So if heat's not like a huge concern for you and you don't need, permanent monitoring stuff, but you just kind of need to know if it goes red, this is something you'd be able to monitor for your guys, or maybe they only go out very infrequently. That's something you'd be able to do.
We have had a couple of people that say that they do have that app, and they do recommend it. So,
yeah, highly recommend it. It's really very helpful. I love it, and it's perfect because this is an OSHA event, so we get to go, hey, good job, OSHA. Which we don't often maybe say that. While the heat index and OSHA's app are going to tell you that temperature and humidity, that combined impact of those in your area, that area might not be reflective of your conditions. So whether that's due simply to, the distance you are from wherever they may be monitoring. I know that, whenever the weatherman's telling you, like, often it's coming from your local airport, or like from a school in your area, or the station itself. So if that's, due to the distance from wherever those readings are being taken, but it can also be due to some processes that you have in your facility. So the conditions you actually have at your site. So if you need more specific information or more descriptive information for your facility or a particular area where your people are working, you may need to sort of upgrade. You might have to invest in a wet bulb globe temperature monitor. So you'll hear these called WBGTs or widgets. And so the WBGT is going to take a bit more into account. So that's going to include the intensity of the sun and then also wind speed. So it's much more reflective of how a person is actually going to be dealing with or experiencing that heat. And so this is something that you can kind of move up. All these are just options for sort of tools in your toolbox. So having that app, and maybe every now and then you have to deploy widgets to a particular site. For some reason, construction keeps coming to mind, but I guess that's just because you mentioned someone with construction. But this WBGT is going to be monitoring the thermal stress conditions of the place where you actually set it up. So it's much more localized. So you're going to have a much better feel of what your guys are experiencing, and you can sort of set limits as necessary, or be able to, sometimes it's just about perception, right? Setting this up in an area where maybe you really know you don't have a problem, but you want your guys to know that you're taking care of them. So you've got the monitor set up, you're checking it regularly, you're letting them know what to look for on the monitor to know if anything's wrong. And now the monitoring, we're gonna see some of this. The monitoring is incredible. You can get visual alarms and auditory alarms and texts and emails. There's all sorts of things where you can really customize it, I guess, to your needs. So if you do need a WBGT, you are going to want to make sure that it complies with any relevant standards. So this may just depend kind of on your specific use case. And this came up yesterday too, where, I bet we're even going to see more regulations kind of popping up. Community or like businesses are going to require that if you're coming onto their side as a contractor, that you're having to monitor this or have your own heat illness prevention plan. There might be some standard that you're having to reference. So you want to make sure that it complies with any of those. Make sure that it has very accurate temperature sensors, and then make sure that it can be used in whatever wide range of environmental conditions that you're going to need to use it in. So if you know that you're going from a very, very cold environment where you're needing to look for cold stress to a very, very hot environment, we'll make sure that whatever monitor you're purchasing is going to cover that wide range. You want it to also provide you with WBGT readings that are going to be both with and without that solar load, so typically called indoor or outdoor. I guess unless you exclusively know you're working in one area or the other, but probably not for most use cases for the WBGT.
Oh, and this is great because we did have a question about the actual sizing of the globes and everything. So I think this is what you'll cover now.
Well, go ahead and ask the question.
No, just why are there different sizes of the actual globes and how they're utilized?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question. So these are just some of the other useful features that you'll want to know if you need or want, so you can get the right. Oh, I keep using this phrase. We're like right tools for your toolkit. So the different size globes, there is a big 6-inch globe that can be mounted on your WBGT. And it is like, I guess the best way to put it is like, it would be the primary standard. Because then, so what happens when you go down to this 2-inch globe is it has a calculation that is adjusting for going from that 6-inch down to that 2-inch. So does that kind of make sense? And so it's doing it sort of secondhand. Yep. It's going from being, so that's why, and this is something that you would just have to look in your standard if it required it. There might be a standard out there, and I'm saying that because I genuinely don't know. There might be one that's out there that requires that you use that 6-inch globe instead of using the 2-inch that's going to adjust, with the calculation. Sure. So then there's going to be things that accessories that you might purchase to adjust for wind speed. And then almost all of these, I'm sure, although whenever I've used my WBGTs, and I'm, super old school at this point, which is very sad for me, but I've always used them just standalone and had to go out and read the measurements off the screen. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. You can plug it in and it can communicate with the software, and it's going to give you, so much stuff that you can do that I probably can't even imagine at this point. But you can also have those alarms that I mentioned. I never had any of those. We always had old school call it up. The temperature's gotten too hot, and Lord knows then you're trying to get everyone to figure out who needs to know what. This is when I worked as an industrial hygienist for the Army, and we had to monitor a site in Hohenfels, Germany. And so in Germany, they're not very well acclimated to the heat. So when it would get very hot, it would be a big deal, and it didn't happen often. But when it did hit that, you'd have to, you'd up the caution level, and you kind of had to contact all these commanders. And looking at what's available now, I can see that would really be a lot easier these days. You would have it set up to automatically email or text or, whatever, let people know, a visual alarm. So these are some of those available accessories, and you're starting to see here that these systems can be quite complex. I mean, it doesn't have to be, these are just the options, right?
Mhm.
But so there you've got your wind cup. Over here, you've got your anemometer. This is one of your alarms. These are one of our full like indoor, outdoor, stationary or mobile systems. These are just the heat shield. So this is the Wibjet. And then I can't remember if I have this in a future slide, but the Wibjet has optional satellites that are pretty cool because they're gonna be able to be set up as far as 300 meters line of sight. Is that the right terminology? Yeah, like line of sight. And so the satellites will just send everything back to the main unit. So you're able to view 3 separate sites and you're getting independent readings, but you can also then you combine them because these are also made to do the head, torso, and then feet of like a person if you're trying to get how it's going to feel across the whole body, and it can average those, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, okay. There's also solar panels to power those outdoor units. Especially if you have one that's like permanent, you could then use solar energy, so you're not having to worry about that.
I do have a quick question, Dr. Lynch. So any advantages or disadvantages of water versus waterless wet bulbs?
I mean, the advantage of the waterless is that you're not having to add water, but in my experience, I prefer the ones where you add the water. I've never felt great about the extra calculation that goes into that. And I have no justification for that. So that's just my personal, I like the water, and it's not like it's that much of a hassle to just fill it up and then you know it's working. And that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you know you have a problem and you want to run at this problem sort of head on, then you can invest in a heat stress monitoring solution. And so with the first one we talked about was our the Wibjet. So I do have a slide on this. This has got it may look like a complicated slide, but this is just the Wibjet we discussed earlier. I should have mentioned that OHD is the distributor of the LSI equipment, so heat stress equipment. But LSIs, so this one, ours is called the Heat Shield, which I now realize I may have just been using interchangeably with Wibjet and WBGT, and so sorry about that. But it has all of the above, all of these listed things. It of course meets all the requirements that I've talked about earlier, and you know, I'm sure that competitors do too. One cool thing I already mentioned was the satellite units, but these are just kind of like your base level heat stress monitoring solution that are, you know, any safety person's going to feel comfortable using what I use. Anyone who's doing inspection, and then also a lot of researchers use these too. Then we also have, if you go like further on, if you want a mounted or more permanent solution for your facility, you may want to implement, you know, a more involved solution. So these can be strategically mounted around a facility and provide notifications of dangerous conditions or like whatever conditions you may want to set for your site. And so it can get as involved essentially as you want it. So they're both portable and stationary indoor and outdoor units that can continuously monitor. You'll see these a lot at athletic program fields. So in the summer months, at least in the US, well, actually, so in the US alone, an average of 3 high school students or high school and college football players die every year from heat stroke. So it's still a very serious issue. And I think a lot more of these programs are implementing you know, one of these solutions to make it where they're able to monitor when conditions get bad so they can protect their athletes. So it's kind of cool. And when I was at Auburn, they definitely had that, War Eagle. These are, and this is what I was getting at, where like the communication stuff has just gotten, it's so advanced now. All of these units are then going to be able to communicate in a ton of different ways. You're going to be able to set up text or alerts or emails, visual and auditory alarms, all of that, et cetera. And just for the record, when you're talking about the implementation of these various heat monitoring solutions, this is of course after you've already gone through and trained your guys. Like, you know, it would make no sense to go out to your facility and you mount all these systems and you've got alarms that go off and like people have no idea what's going on, right? So this is once you've really gotten your guys trained up, you already have your heat prevention plan. Don't just run and willy-nilly put up a solution when you haven't done the work that OSHA is going to expect you to have done, which is go and have a heat illness prevention plan. That's what they're going to ask you for. And I mean, having these solutions is a fantastic option, but make sure you have that plan in place first so that you know how these solutions fit into that plan and you know that your guys are trained on that. Okay. So this is a recent update to the heat shield, and it allows you to input manually the options that are needed to get your WBGT index and your WBGT effective. This is kind of more just for you IH nerds, because I know you're out there and I am one of you. So you also can go ahead. So without, this is just kind of getting into those calculations. So with or without solar load, you have that WBGT formula selection. You got your metabolic rate selection. That's either from the table or by manual choice. And then you've got your clothing adjustment value selection. And that's also either from the table or by manual choice. So just kind of some kind of cool stuff. It will do the WBGT reference according to the subject type. So that's whether your guys are acclimated or not. And then the action limit here comes from ACGIH. It will then give you your distance to or from that limit. So it can clearly also still do the heat index and your humidex. And then if you want that comfort index, you'll need to add an accessory for the airspeed value. So that PMV, PPD comfort index, if you're not familiar with that, that's the predicted mean vote and predicted percentage of dissatisfied people. It's the most widely used for thermal comfort indices. So in case you don't know what that is, but, and if you don't, maybe you don't need to. So this is an example of logic making chart for WBGT readings. So if you're just implementing a WBGT solution, you can establish a work rest schedule. And this is what I talked about where, I was having to take readings and maybe I'm just sending that up. I could take those readings and then implement it into this chart, have some logic to identify how long my guys can work safely and then how long they need to take a break. And I'm sure all of you, or hope all of you have heard of these work rest schedules. If you get into heavy work, then it's going to want you to do physiological monitoring. So that's like heart rate monitors or personal monitors. And so now you're seeing, again, this can just get as involved really as you want it. So maybe you have some WBGTs that you're putting in certain areas, and then you have fixed systems for your facility. And then you have some personal monitors for these guys who are going out. I'm trying to think of like a very specific use case, but so, my bricklayers, when I used to work in the steel industry, those were guys who I knew were getting a whole lot of heat, just, a ton. And so like maybe I have personal monitors for them. Okay. So physiological monitoring is also it. Okay. Is everything okay on the, we're still good? Okay, that's so weird. Zoom just popped up a message and said that I was logged out.
Whatever we can see.
Okay, so physiological monitoring is its whole own thing. More and more technologies are emerging here. So if you go in that direction or you want to add that to your toolbox, I don't know why I keep thinking that's just the best way to use this, but like seriously, so now you've got your app on your phone, that's like very base level. Well, then you need to move into adding some monitoring solutions, and that can go, so you can see the thing go as crazy as you want. Now you've got your physiological monitoring technology. But if you go that direction, these are some helpful notes for documentation. And hopefully we all know that in general, you're just going to document everything no matter what tech you are or aren't using, right? OSHA is going to be most concerned with you simply having a heat illness prevention plan. So you need to have that hazard assessment. Heat is just another one of your hazard assessments that you need to perform. Oh dear, so sorry. And now I don't know how to do that. Okay. So these are just some other more notes kind of on important measurements that you'll need to collect once you get to that stage. And I kind of feel like we've sort of covered enough here, because I already mentioned how these can be spaced apart or they can be set to where they're doing, sort of like that whole human setup. But I just want to take a minute to really touch on what I mentioned about you having a plan, because you're going to need to show that you've trained your people. You're going to need to make sure that it's easy for guys to take a break. That was one thing I found really frustrating with the whole COVID experience, where you're like telling people they need to stay 6 feet apart, but then you go look in their break area and you've got seats right next to each other, right? Well, that's the same thing for people taking a break when it's hot. You have to make it easy for them to take a break. Their break area needs to be right there. It needs to have cool water. It needs to have nice cool air running across them. Like, you need to make it easy for people to do the right thing, or they're not going to do it. Okay, also make sure that your team is trained. I promise you that OSHA is going to ask someone what they're supposed to do in the event of a heat-related emergency. And then if you do have any of these monitoring solutions set up, OSHA is going to want to know if they know what to do when like that alarm goes off or they get that text message. Okay. So random note here, kind of about what I talked about. There is free OSHA training available through funding from a Susan Harwood grant that's available. I know it's available nationwide. I can only speak to my area having it available through Safe State out of the University of Alabama, because I do some of their training, not specifically heat stress, but don't worry, you can request someone else. But I believe that funding goes through September, so get it while it's hot. Pun intended there. And that was our final webinar for Safe+Sound Week 2022.
That was great.
Do we have any questions?
We have one. Is there such thing as a personal heat stress monitoring solution versus like an area monitoring?
Yes. So that's what I was talking about with that physiological monitoring. I'm sorry. That was me maybe being a bit too vague. Yes, there are personal heat stress monitors. There are multiples available. The only one I can think of off the top of my head right now is called Sleep Safety, but they're, they all have their own algorithm for how they're assessing core temperature, and they all have, the same bells and whistles essentially, where you can set it up, you can GPS monitor your guys to track them, not in like a creepy way, but like if you do have lone workers, right?
Sure.
And maybe you need to keep an eye on someone's like physiological stuff, but also know where they are so that you can call emergency services, stuff like that. I'm trying to think of other things, even your Apple Watch has like the ability to see if like a fall is detected or something. And I think that some of these personal heat stress monitors can do some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I meant about like, if you have a particular person or a particular crew that you're worried about, that might be a better solution. If you have like an entire facility, then it might be more cost effective to introduce one of these, systems. Anybody else?
Would someone ask, can you explain the automatic start stop function?
I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what instrument you might be talking about. So do you mean with the heat shield? Are they able to kind of respond?
Yeah, with the heat stress monitor.
Yeah, with the heat shield. Okay, so my understanding of the automatic start stop of measurements is you can set it to start at a given time, and then you can set it to stop at a given time. And that's the only way that I've used it. It's just essentially the same way you can set up your noise dosimeter to, we start recording at this time, we stop at lunch, then give an hour for lunch, then we start again.
Gotcha.
So these have that capability.
Gotcha. Perfect. I think that's all the questions we have. So
all right. Well, if anybody has anything else, my contact information, well, it's not actually up there, but but Justin will be sending an email out, and you can contact Justin and he can figure out if you're important enough to send along with me.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, OSHA. Thank you, Safe+Sound. As Dr. Lynch stated, feel free to reach out to us if we can ever be of any assistance. And thank you all for joining us. So have a great day. Have a great weekend.
And I'm on my way to Napa.
Yes.